Dr. David Levine. Today is April 9th, 2022. I'm in San Diego at the American Association of Plastic Surgeons meeting, and I'm here as part of the ICON project to interview icons in plastic surgery. They could be educators, forward thinkers, innovators, or a combination of all three. Right now, the interview that I'm having, and I'm honored to do it, is with Dr. Burt Brent, who, among other things, has done over 2,000 ear reconstructions. I just want to put a personal note that I'd already spoken to Burt about. When I was a resident in the early 70s, we went to a meeting, and I don't remember where it was, but I remember that the hubbub was, you've got to see Burt Brent's ear reconstruction. And I can tell you, prior to that time, the results made a cauliflower ear look good. It was just, we just couldn't get consistent results. I can also tell you in the room, when he gave his talk, you could hear a pin drop because his results are amazing, amazing. And I would recommend that you, well, hopefully you will as a resident watching this or any other person to look up what he's done. As a clinician, and I'm going to look down because he has so many accolades, that the thing that he stressed to me, and is important from the point of view of accomplishments, that he is the James Barrett Brown twice the choice for clinician best clinical paper of the year, referable, I believe, to ear reconstruction. Not only that, he has a military background that he's going to discuss. He's got some other things that we're going to talk about, and just a part of his background is an artist, an important part. I'm going to read this because I couldn't memorize it, but his numerous awards include the Allied Artist of the American Gold Medal of Honor, the North American Sculpture Burgess Award. He's received the Society of Animal Artists, Donald Miller Memorial Award, the Members' Choice Award, the Award of Excellence. His sculpting talents, which we in San Diego, if you go to the zoo, has how many sculptures there right now in the zoo at San Diego?
There's a 7-foot-tall stainless steel polar bear that I sculpted. There's a 10-foot-long bronze hippopotamus that everybody sits on. These are in the San Diego Zoo. And
you'll get to see those pictures because they'll be interspersed with the interview itself. He made his statement that with his bronzes that when we talked on the phone, that he stresses symmetrical lines over anatomical details. And if you see his sculpture, you'll see that symmetry that he talks about. I'm excited to, let me see a few other things that we're going to discuss. His family influence with regard to plastic surgery. And even though this is an icon lecture for plastic surgeons, he's also involved with one of the greatest banjo players in American history, Earl Scruggs, referable, and he'll tell you about their work together and what he did, referable to Earl Scruggs in the book that Earl wrote. And I already mentioned your military experience. Oh, with paratroopers. And that's pertinent today. And he said, would you please mention that right now we're at the middle of the Masters and Tiger Woods made the cut, which is a miracle in itself, because 12 months ago he had a shattered leg that they thought they would have to amputate. And right now he's probably finished up his third round at the Masters, walking up and down those hills, which is a testament to modern science. And I'm looking forward to your experience with a relationship with Tiger Woods and his father, Earl Woods, and again, with your experience with the Special Forces. Thank you, Dr. Burt Brent, for coming.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Okay, and I'm going to say, would you say your date of birth?
Oh, well, it's a bit significant from the standpoint of what I do as a plastic surgeon. I was born on the Ides of March, March 15th, 1938. And I say it's significant because You have to remember the speech, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I always like to joke to my friends that's why I ended up being an ear reconstructionist. Because if all those ears were going to be loaned out, somebody would eventually have to reconstruct those missing ears. And my friends, because of that speech having been done by Brutus, you remember A2 Brute, they nickname me Brutus. Very often they call me Brutus, as does my wife. So there was something special about this specifically being born on the Ides of March. So it was predetermined that I'd be building all those missing ears that had been loaned out.
Interesting. We talked before, and you wanted to discuss this about your family medical background and your artistic background. I'm going to let you elaborate on that because it's just, you'll do it better than I could reiterate it.
Okay. Basically, I came out of the womb doing art. I've never not known doing art. I built my own toys as a kid. I built my own hamster cages, built my own treadmills for my hamsters. And my maternal grandfather came over from Lithuania as a merchant marine. He ended up building decorative office buildings and homes. And he was very artsy. He became a very good painter in his latter years. We look alike. We have the same sense of humor. I'm almost a clone of my maternal grandfather. So when I was about 10 or 12, I think, I announced to my father that I was going to be an artist. Well, my father went to pharmacy school, practiced pharmacy on nights and weekends to put himself through medical school. He ended up as a GP, general surgeon, OBGYN, all rolled into one. And he had his office in the basement of our home. So I really grew up with medicine. So when I announced to him that I was going to be an artist, I was so interested and I did so many different art forms. He said, son, art is a hobby. He said, do something useful like I do. You can always practice your hobby on nights and weekends. Little did he know that my hobby would become my profession. So when I began to think about it, what I should do, I was very influenced by my father. He was a great doctor. And my brother ended up as a urologist. My brother's 2 years older. So it was a whole family of physicians. And I was going to go to medical school. My father convinced me it'd be a great way to help people. And I started thinking about all my art background. And I thought, well, if I'm going into medicine, I probably should be a plastic surgeon because of my art. I had no idea what a plastic surgery did at that point in my life, but it sounded like that's what I ought to be doing. And as soon as I got into my residency of plastic surgery, I became very acutely aware that one of the most difficult things we did in plastic surgery was to recreate the absent ear. And Dr. Radford Tanzer, who really started ear reconstruction, he was retired. He'd done 40 some odd ear reconstructions. He was mainly a hand surgeon, actually. And we were at a meeting, my wife and I, at a plastic surgery meeting. It was probably ASPRS, it might have been the association meeting. But he had been given an award, and he said, this is very timely because I'm retiring next year. And my wife turned to me, she says, you know, with all your art ability and Dr. Tanzer retiring, why don't you carry this on and really learn how to make a really good ear and take care of people who are missing ears?
And what year was this again? Remember?
This has been about 1970 or 71.
Okay.
71, I think. So I started going to the morgue and getting rib cartilage and carving it on the kitchen table. So I could carve cartilage into a very reasonable looking ear, which is the basic framework for ear reconstruction. And the only thing that works is human rib cartilage. And it can't come from the mother. It can't come from a cadaver. It won't work. It will slowly be absorbed and turned into scar tissue. It has to come from the patient themselves. So it's a very demanding discipline. Little did I know that I would end up doing 2,000 of them during my career. So to me, it was just another art form because I've always done all sorts of art. I built my own decorative banjos before I could even play them as a challenge to myself. I wanted to have a really beautiful banjo with inlaid woods and mother of pearl. And if it came out good, then I would learn how to play the banjo. That was my challenge to myself. So I was always doing every which kind of art form. And being a very avid naturalist, and I grew up just loving nature, my first hobby was taxidermy. I've skinned everything from a mouse to a moose and a hummingbird to an eagle, and learned how to do taxidermy. And the basics of taxidermy is you're doing a sculpture and draping a skin on it. Now, those are the real basics. And of course, I was learning the anatomy of every kind of creature imaginable. And I worked as an apprentice in a taxidermy shop every Saturday of my 13th birthday, my 13th year. And so I became interested in doing real serious sculpture, bronzes. And I thought, well, how am I going to do this? So I sort of thought back on my taxidermy days when I really started doing serious sculpture. And I thought, well, I'll create a sculpture form. Instead of draping a skin on doing taxidermy, I'll cover it with an extra layer of clay, which I will then model into the animal or bird that I'm doing. And then once you have the clay model, I then have to learn how to convert it to bronze, to metal. And this is done by the lost wax technique. No. You have to go from clay to wax to metal. And so the way it's done is I would do a sculpture, a form, upon which I put extra clay. I would sculpt the clay until I had the exact creature I wanted. And then I would make my own rubber mold.
How old were you at this point? I'm trying to get
I think when I really started doing those kind of sculptures, I was in my 30s. Maybe.
Okay, I'm sorry. I wanted to get a time reference.
This came a little later on.
Okay.
And so I would make a mold of the sculpture into which I would pour and slosh hot wax and spill it out, pour another layer, spill it out, and go from a clay model, which is positive, to a rubber mold, which is a negative, to a wax model, which is a positive, a replica of the original clay. And then this is covered with a slurry of plaster-like substances called investment. And then you put this in a big oven, and you don't do this at home, this is done in a foundry, and melt the wax out at a very high temperature. So you now have this investment plaster-like material, which is a negative, into which you pour molten bronze. And when that cools, you crack off the investment. So you go from a clay positive sculpture to a rubber negative mold, to a wax positive, to a plaster-like negative, to finally a bronze positive. So that's the whole process. It's a very involved process. But it's kind of like plastic surgery because you have to think in reverse. You have to think of the finished product and figure out how to get there. You have to figure out how to get there. And solving plastic surgery problems always involves this. If you're building a total nose, you're usually building it upside down on the forehead and then transferring it down. So you have to visualize the finished product. Doing an ear reconstruction is done in 3 or 4 stages. But the first stage, the main stage, you've got to create a sculpture, a replica of the opposite ear, a reversed replica, out of living cartilage from the patient and get it underneath the skin. And then with the vacuum tubes, suck the skin down so it's in direct application to the cartilage. So the circulation is percolating through the skin, is nourishing that cartilage.
I got to ask you a question.
Okay.
It ain't that easy with the ear. But thank you for saying that. Because doing ear reconstruction, the problem was, one, the skin's fairly thick. And it's your skeletal infrastructure, the cartilage, and the ear, that was the pin drop part. Nobody could do that before. Everything swelled up. You lost the contours. How many years did it take you to get to the point you say, like doing breast augments, after about 3, you got an idea how to do it? How many years did it take?
It's hard to say. You know, it's an evolving process. The more experience you have, the better it gets. During the summertime, when I was really taking care of kids from everywhere, I mean, I remember a record month where I think I did maybe 25 or 30 in 1 month, where I do one
That's
a day.
Lot. Yeah.
I do 1 a day, and some days where I'd be doing 2. And I even did, I brought pictures in, I think you're going to show, a pair of identical mirror image twins. One with it on the left, one on the right. I did them back to back, and I was out talking to the family. I started at 7:30 in the morning. I was talking to the family at 2 o'clock in the afternoon after both of them were done.
That's pretty good.
Although I actually came out and talked to the family first after the first one, and then went back and did the second, and I was out talking to them again. So, you know, if you do a volume or repetition of something, you can work the kinks out of it. You get better as you go along. And, it's a steadily evolving process where you improve little by little. And it's the same thing with sculpture. And I used to really push myself in the studio and really do really difficult, technically difficult sculptures on purpose, because it made me better in the operating room.
Sure.
Because I wouldn't run into something I couldn't handle. And I would push myself doing some sculptures that were incredibly difficult on purpose. I think that's a big part of it, of learning how to problem solve.
I got to ask you a question because I'll forget if I don't think of it. I want to know, your wife is an artist too, correct?
She
did
considers
you go
herself,
to Europe with, that was the story.
She considers herself an artisan.
Okay.
She's very good at design. So she's very good at refinishing furniture. She's good. She's a Jack or Jane of all trades.
Okay. I didn't know what I just remember hearing that you had been in Europe and you were over there.
Oh, we were commissioned to make replicas of very famous pre-Columbian gold artifacts that were in a museum in Madrid. We were commissioned by the Gold Museum in Bogota, Colombia, to do this. And I actually took a year off between general surgery and plastic surgery to work for museums.
Okay, well that was just, yeah.
But to me, it's all one and the same. What I used to tell, whether you're doing a sculpture in clay, wax, and bronze, or if you're doing an ear reconstruction, it's just another type of sculpture, but an ear reconstruction. And this is during consultation with the families. I would explain and show them lots of pictures of what goes on with the ear reconstruction. And I showed them a few pictures, like of these 6-foot-tall geese I did in clay and converted to bronze. It's in the San Diego Zoo. It's in front of the Children's Hospital in Charlottesville. I did another number of copies of it. But I would tell the families, I actually have hobbies that are far more difficult than building an ear.
Yeah,
But
but
in ear building, the rules are tougher. I have to use your child's cartilage, keep it alive, not get infected, not let the skin die over it. And the biggest trick you were, I think, bring out when we were first talking is the skin issue. Well, here's the real problem. You have to learn how to carve rib cartilage to look just like an ear long before you get into the operating room. That's why I practice on cadaver cartilage quite a bit first. Because you can't go into the operating room and harvest cartilage and say, I wonder if I can get harvest cartilage and carve an ear.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be a given. It has to be there as a given. It's like microsurgery. You have to learn how to put together these tiny vessels on rat femoral arteries and veins. You can't go into the operating room to do a planned free transfer of tissue microvascularly, wondering if, gee, I wonder if I can put these 1 millimeter vessels together and keep the patent and not have it clot off. It's got to be a given, and that's why every microsurgeon practices on rat femoral arteries and veins first. So when you walk in to do an elective free tissue transfer, microvascularly, you already know you can do it. It's got to be a given, or else you're not doing elective microsurgery unless it's a given that you know how to do that. You're not doing an ear reconstruction unless it's a given you can harvest cartilage and carve a nice ear framework that looks like an ear. Because the big problem in carving the ear, when fellow surgeons would come to watch me do this, they were all interested in the carving of the ear. That I learned how to do before I ever came into the operating room. The big problem is this. You're trying to stick a three-dimensional framework under a flat 2 dimensions of skin. This is like putting 5 pounds of plaster into a 2-pound bag. And so the peak tension is right where the helix is. It's like the ridgepole on a tent.
Right.
And if it's too tight, that skin will die and you'll lose the whole ear reconstruction. So the thing that took me so long to learn was not carving patients' rib cartilage into an ear, was learning how to safely make this very thin pocket, maintain the circulation, and not have it up too tense once that framework was under the skin. That's what took the years of practice and the years of experience, not the carving of the framework. Everybody's interested in the carving framework, but it has to be a given. You've got to be able to carve a really nice framework.
Right.
You've got to know when you walk in that's not an issue.
Well, that's why I ask you that. And the 1 ear reconstruction I did, which was the perfect patient, I had the carving tools. I was into wood carving. Carving the cartilage is one. And that's why I said, how many did it take you? And you said, well, you get an experience, but when you first start out, you don't want to thin that flap out too much, or you're going to end up with the cartilage exposed.
What's the real trick?
Yeah, well, that's why I said, how many did it take?
If you make the covering skin flap too thick, it'll probably survive, but the ear will end up looking like a bagel.
Really?
And if you make it really thin,
I know,
so that it's really great.
It'll look good for 2 weeks.
If you make it really thin, you could end up killing the subdermal vascular
That's
plexus,
what I mean.
losing the whole shooting match.
Yeah.
So the trick what you have to learn with doing a volume of them is just what you can get away with the thinnest skin covering without destroying the subdermal vascular plexus.
Well, this is why I asked you this question, because anybody, a resident watching this, whenever, this was a unique procedure that you accomplished extraordinary results with, but between the idea and the idea and the reality falls a shadow. which is T.S. Eliot.
Mhm.
That in between part, that's because I did that, and you're right. It didn't look that good,
Yeah.
and I thought, okay, but I was frightened to make it too thin. But I appreciate your input. There's a learning curve like everything else, but you didn't have. It wasn't like a sculpture. You don't like the clay. You can crunch it up, you do it. You can't do that
No,
with
but
the carling.
but there's a big learning process even in the casting of it. I did a sculpture of a loon. You may or may not know the bird, but they have a speckled back. And the way I did it is, I did the sculpture I called the filigree loon. So the speckles are all open holes,
Okay.
a latticework of open holes on the back of this loon. And when I brought it into the foundry and talked with the foundry workers, they said, "Doc, it's never going to cast. It's going to be too thin." I said, "Pour the bronze a little hotter." Bronze is usually poured at 1800 to 2000 degrees. I said, "Pour it at 2100 and it'll flow." And it did. But if you went like 2200 or 2250, the metal will start bubbling and you'll get a faulty casting. So there's all these little things you learn. I've only done a few stainless steel castings. Like I said, the bronze is poured at maybe 2,000 degrees, 1900, 2100. Stainless steel is poured at 3,200 degrees. So the big 7-foot tall polar bear I did for the San Diego Zoo for their new polar bear exhibit, that was a real trick because we cast it in pieces, and then you have to weld it together. Even the big bronzes, like those geese, we did in 12 pieces, the picture of geese. It's a whole different ball game to weld stainless steel together. As you heat it up, the parts to weld together, it starts to move and twist and everything. And you have to learn how to work with it. So everything has got this learning curve, whether it's reconstructing an ear, reconstructing a nose, doing a good post-mastectomy breast reconstruction, or casting in bronze or casting in steel. Everything's got this learning curve.
Okay, I want to make a little shift here.
Okay.
I want to know about Earl Woods and Tiger
Earl
Woods
Woods?
and Special Forces.
Oh.
Because apparently I figured out, Burt, you don't sleep. So that's an advantage you have over me.
Well, I'm starting to sleep more.
No,
now.
it's okay. That was a joke. But
So
Tell us.
it was the peak of Vietnam when I was interning. I was at University of Michigan Hospital in Ann Arbor. There were 24 interns. 21 of us got our draft notice within weeks of each other. 21 of 24. It was the peak of Vietnam. I ended up with the 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles, in Tennessee, just 50 miles from Nashville. But I had already fallen in love with the 5-string banjo and the music that the greatest banjoist played. His name is Earl Scruggs. And I had this very decorative banjo that I built. And one of my last patients as an intern was from Tennessee. I said, "Oh, I'm going to be in your part of the world pretty soon." And I told her I was going to be with the 101st Airborne 50 miles from Nashville. She says, "Why are you so excited?" I said, "Well, I'm really into bluegrass banjo. I built a decorative banjo and taught myself how to play it. And I'll be right there where all the action is happening." She says, "Do you know who Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs are?" I said, "Of course." She says, "Well, my cousin was the bus driver and rhythm guitarist for Flatt and Scruggs. He's been in a motorcycle accident. He's a paraplegic. I know he'd love if you'd look him up and do some music with him," which I did. She told me what little town he lived in. And this man said to me, "That's the most beautiful banjo I've ever seen. You have to show it to Earl Scruggs." I said, "Where does he live?" "He's in a suburb of Nashville." So I went to the suburb and I asked the harvester, "Anybody know where Earl Scruggs lived?" let's see, yeah, go down this road, this road, this road, and you'll see a big red and white bus that says Martha White Flower Flat and Scruggs on it. So I was parked in front of his house. And this was a Saturday. He'll probably be home because he'll be playing in the Grand Ole Opry tonight. So I followed his directions, came to the house. There was the bus. I come marching up the sidewalk, carrying my homemade banjo in the homemade case. And I knock on the door, and here comes Earl Scruggs to the door. The man had just played Carnegie Hall. He was really well known. He was doing all the music for the Beverly Hillbillies. He was very, very well known. He comes to the door, and he sees me holding a banjo. He says, well, I see you didn't come empty-handed. So I told him I was a doctor in the 101st Airborne Division, and I was really into the banjo. He said, well, come on in. And we sat and talked like you and I were talking. He was the nicest guy on earth. And I said to him, Earl, how come you've never done an instruction book? There's a zillion people wanting to play the 5-string banjo. There's not a good instruction book on. Pete Seeger covered it in his banjo book, about 6 pages on your style of banjo playing. And it was very, very skimpy. He says, well, I hate to admit this to you, but I have no idea what I'm doing. I just play this thing.
Interesting.
I don't read music. I just play it. I said, well, there's rhyme and reason to everything you do. There's all these patterns you do with your right hand. I said, this can be taught on paper without reading music. We have this system called tablature, where we take 5 lines of a musical staff and pretend like they're the 5 strings of the banjo. And I said, for instance, if you fret the 2nd string on the 3rd fret, on the 2nd line there'd be a 3 on it. And if you hit it with if you play that with your index, there would be an I underneath. If it was your thumb, it would be a T, and if it was your middle finger, it would be an M. Anyway, I said, there are all these various patterns you do. I said, I've named the patterns. Because there's one where he went thumb, index, thumb, middle, thumb, index, and I called it the alternating thumb pattern. Anyway, I named all these patterns. He said, this is fascinating. I said, give me some paper and a pencil. And I wrote out a bunch of sets of 5 lines. And I took one of his really classic songs called Cripple Creek, and I wrote the whole thing out in this tablature form to show all the patterns he was doing and how you could teach this on paper. And he was fascinated. We knew each other for an hour and a half. And I said to him, you know, I'm in the 101st Airborne. We have an hour and a half of sick call in the morning. Once in a while I go out and cover a parachute jump in case somebody breaks a leg. The rest of my time is free. I'd be happy to help you do an instruction book. And furthermore, I do all kinds of art. I can do all the illustrations we need. I talk about trusting. I knew the man for an hour and a half. He says, when do you want to start?
Wow.
And so I said, you tell me. He pulls out his little date book. He says, Monday. This was a Saturday. He said, give me your home phone number. He says, my hobby is flying. I have a twin engine Cessna. I'm going to fly down. When I'm close to the airfield, I'll phone down to the military police. They'll call your house and you'll pick me up. So I went home and I spent the whole weekend. I couldn't sleep. I had to write out the whole contents of this book, the format of it, the chapters, everything we needed to cover. And I did a very formal pen and ink drawing of a banjo with all the parts labeled, because I knew we'd need that in the book just to prove to him I could do the art. And sure enough, he came in, I picked him up, and we got together every minute he wasn't on the road. I can't tell you how many hours I spent with Earl, greatest guy you could ever imagine. And he became my best friend for a year. We spent all this time together. It's still the #1 teaching book on the 5-string banjo in the world. And we did this in 1964 through 5.
Interesting.
We developed a lifelong friendship. When he came to Chicago when I was doing my plastic surgery residency, he would stay with us when he came to play and entertain. He'd stay at our home and we'd jam. And he'd bring one of his sons over, Randy Scruggs, who was a great guitarist. We'd all sit around and have jams.
What an interesting life you've had.
It's been a fascinating
life. As they would say, a great journey.
Yeah, it was great. The military was just fascinating. So from the 101st Airborne, we got a call from the Special Forces in Panama. They wanted one of the doctors from the 101st Airborne. And there were 28 of us, 28 docs in the 101st. And my commanding officer, who was a thoracic surgeon, he knew us all well. And he comes up to me and says, Brent, you're a nature boy. He knew I was an avid naturalist. I said, yeah. He says, how would you like to be in the jungles of Panama? He said, I said, sounds pretty cool. He says, well, we have a call from the Special Forces. They want one of our doctors, and I think you're the perfect one. So next thing you know, I'm in the Green Berets in Panama.
Wow.
And I went through jungle survival school the week after Neil Armstrong went through it. So many different experiences in the jungle. It was phenomenal. But one of the little side stories, which seems pertinent today because the Masters golf tournament is on and Tiger Woods is making his comeback, this story is almost unbelievable. This is 1965, and there was a Colonel Earl Woods serving in the Green Berets at the same time I was in Panama. And we had a drink together one night in the officers club. And he asked me, he says, have you been to Vietnam, Doc? I said, no, I just missed by 2 weeks. I 101st went there 2 weeks after I shipped to Panama. I said, have you been there? He said, yeah, I've been there. I said, any experiences you want to talk about? Well, not really, but I will mention one thing. A South Vietnamese officer saved my life. And I swore that if I ever had a son, I would name him after this man who saved my life. So what was his name? So he gave me this kind of Vietnamese name that I didn't understand. He says, his nickname was Tiger. So I didn't think twice about it. This is 1965.
Yeah.
Fast forward a number of years, I'm in probably 1976 or so. I'm now at Stanford. I'm in a dentist's office waiting to see the dentist. And I'm looking at a magazine, and the cover story on the Sports Illustrated is Tiger and Earl Woods. I start reading through it and how Earl Woods had served as a officer in the Green Berets. Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
He was telling me that he was going to name a kid Tiger if he ever had a son. And here he is, the world's greatest golfer. So that was very interesting to reflect back on this drink I had with him. So it's really terrific to see Tiger battling through this. There's a lot of adversity in life one has to battle through. And I've never seen a man battle like this. He already has 15 majors, and he almost lost a leg. And it has to be tough to have been number one in the world, be number 755 in the world, or what it is right now at the moment. And to come out to the Masters and actually make the cut and get into the weekend. Boy, that's tough.
Oh, I agree with you. I stopped somebody at the airport, had a golf shirt on. I said, isn't Tiger amazing?
Yeah.
But, that's fortitude.
I know.
What can I say?
I love to reflect back on the fact that his father told me he was going to name his kid Tiger.
You were there.
Yeah.
That's great.
So it's kind of fun to think back on that.
All right, let me see. Let's circle around here. I think we've covered everything pretty good.
I will make one comment.
Okay.
I'm a total Beatles freak. I love the Beatles. I'm very involved in music. I'm a piano player, banjo player, guitar player. But my favorite words ever written by a Beatle were written by John Lennon. John Lennon wrote in one of his songs, "Life is what happens when you are busy making other plans."
Mm-hmm. Oh, I listen to Beatles channel all the time on Sirius.
I love that line.
And I love the story. Yeah.
Isn't that a great line?
Yeah. Yeah. I love Long and Winding Road.
Yeah.
That's
because we just don't know what we're going to end up doing.
Yeah.
I told my father I was going to be an artist, and I ended up doing artwork within plastic surgery, living sculpture. Building an ears, building a living sculpture, basically.
Yeah.
With very difficult rules.
Well, that's why you're here, because you're an icon. One last question. Where do you see plastic surgery, if you've thought about this, in the next quarter century?
Well,
You think we'll grow ears in petri dishes and your procedure will be antiquated? What do you think?
I don't think so. The real problem is if you put something, an alloplastic material, like a silicone framework or a Medpor framework, under thin skin, under tension, the skin thins out like the knee on an old pair of pants.
Right.
It atrophies. The next thing you know, you've got exposure. It's got to be living tissue. And it's got to be sturdy. You can't put a flimsy ear sculpture under this tight retroauricular skin.
Right.
It's got to be strong. I don't see it getting solved that way. But never say never. I mean, one of my real mentors was Joe Murray, who did the world's first kidney transplant.
And won a Nobel Peace Prize, which very few people know. I mean,
Well,
Nobel Prize in Science, excuse me.
It took a lot of years. I mean, he did it many, many years ago, and they didn't give him the Nobel Prize until 1990.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite thing about Joe Murray is one day out of the clear blue, he called me up or wrote to me. This was in the early 80s, and asked if he could come and visit me and watch me build ears. He always wanted to learn about cartilage transplantation. I knew him only well enough to say hello. And,
Interesting.
And I offered him to stay at our home.
Cool.
And I've been writing a autobiographical novel, short stories. I've written 50 of them or more, and they're on art, music, nature, and surgery. And that one is called The Kindly Nobel Laureate, which I discussed Joe's first kidney transplant over a glass of wine in the evening. And I opened up apologizing to my wife because he accepted he was going to come and stay with us. I said, I think we're going to have a very stuffy New Englander staying with us for a week. He turned out to be the greatest guy in the world. He wasn't stuffy at all, of course. And then he invited us to stay with him in Massachusetts and lecture to and do demonstration surgery to his residence at Harvard. And we stayed at his home for a week. And we became great friends, and we talked all the time. He was amazing.
Well, you're amazing. You've lived a great life, and your job is to keep doing it.
But I'm trying to answer the question you asked me, where's plastic surgery going?
Yeah, okay.
So, how did Joe Murray do the first kidney transplant? Why was he able to do it? We didn't have drugs to combat
I don't
rejection.
know. I never thought about that.
A pair of young men came to his office in their 20s,
Twins?
identical twins.
Okay.
One is healthy, the other one is in kidney failure. And Joe always thought, when he was doing skin graft, when he was in the military at Valley Forge, why can we only transplant skin, which of course is just a temporary measure, using homografts?
Right. I was going to say, yeah.
Why can't we do other organs? And he decided right then and there that the most common organ to be transplanted would be the kidney. So he started doing kidney transplants on dogs just to get technically great at putting the renal artery and vein and the ureter together.
Mm-hmm.
So if we ever figured out how to do it, he'd be technically ready. And bammo, in comes these
perfect
pair of
patient.
identical twins.
Yeah.
And I love this aspect of the whole thing. We didn't have any DNA studies. We had no way to prove whether or not they were identical. Even though people say you got identical twins, it's no absolute guarantee back then. So what did Joe do? He took a piece of skin
I'll put it on his brother.
from each one and swapped the grafts and watched them. And they were not rejected. And that's when he knew for sure that he had identical twins. Only then did he do it. And he told me, it's amazing, during my career, I thought that was a 1 in a billion chance to get identical twins, one in kidney failure, one healthy. He said, I had 5 sets of those during my entire career. 5 sets like that.
Amazing.
In the meantime, They got the drugs going to combat the rejection phenomenon, and jillions of homograph kidney transplants have been done.
Yeah.
So never say never.
But he did the first.
He did the first one, but under those circumstances, because he didn't know
I never thought about
what else
that.
you could do.
Yeah.
And then they started working on the drugs so you wouldn't reject tissues. So things happen, and it's kind of hard to predict what's going to be. But it's a fascinating field. It's a great field, and it's a field that is just absolutely mired in problem solving. And that's how I look at it. Whether it's plastic surgery, doing a sculpture, building a banjo, figuring out how to teach it, whatever it is, you've got to solve a problem. And that's what makes plastic surgery so
I know,
great.
that's the fun
And
part.
there's so
of it.
many great surgeons in our specialty who have solved problems. I spent 5 years doing a book called The Artistry of Reconstructive Surgery. I didn't even put plastic in the title. Why? You meet somebody, they say, what do you do for a living? I'm a plastic surgeon. Oh, doctor, could you do a little? And I hated that. Because nobody seemed to know that we're reconstructive surgeons in cosmetic surgery, but one branch of it. And so I decided to gather the world's experts in every part of the body and put together a coffee table book of reconstructive surgery. It was a five-year project. We had about 70 contributors.
Who published it?
Mosby.
Okay.
The artistry.
Are they still publishing
The artistry
it?
of reconstructive surgery.
They still publishing it?
I don't think they are now.
Well, Dr. Burt Brent, what a pleasure it's been to talk to you.
Well, it's great to
It
talk
turned
to
out
you.
good, didn't it? I said it would just flow. I'll let you do the talking. This is my easiest interview. I didn't have to prod anything. You have enough of the history to go back, and I so appreciate it.
Well, it's interesting. I've led a very interesting life. I'm just very grateful for it. And I'm grateful to be in this specialty. And it's really been fun discussing some of these issues with you.
You, sir, a pleasure. Thank you so much. Did I do all right?
I think you did really well.
Thank you. That's the end.